Okay, so today we're going to be in Genesis chapter 1, the first chapter of the Bible. And this is the account of creation, how the world and the universe came to be. Now, these things are important because the world teaches a different, if you go to, in school, what do the science classes tell you? Where did the world come from? How did it come to be? Big Bang. And then, so in essence, there was this energy that exploded and it turned into atoms, that turned into molecules, that turned into elements, that turned into stars, and turned into the universe, right? And that's not what the Bible teaches us. So we're going to look at what the Bible teaches, and then we're going to talk about, does it matter what we believe afterwards when we get through this? And so we'll talk about that. I had a professor in college, my organic chemistry professor, Dr. Jones. Jesse's probably familiar with this quote. He used to say sometimes we come into class and he'd say, we've got a lot to cover today. If we get a ticket, it's not going to be for driving fast, it's going to be for flying low. So we've got a lot to get through in a half hour, so we'll see what we can do. So Genesis 1, verse 1 says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. You're going to have to forgive me. The printer didn't work, so I don't have my notes tonight, so we're just going to go with it. I was in Wyoming a couple of years ago in Jackson Hole, and we went to an art gallery, and there was a guy in there he made these bronze statues that sold for like $50,000, and he was making one there. He was just starting it. And when we looked at it, you couldn't tell what it was. It was a piece of clay, and it had a mass here and then four kind of things coming down. Looked like it was a body and legs. This is kind of, I think, what it's talking about here. The earth was without form and void. When you talked to him, it was going to be a fox, but you couldn't tell what it was. It was just stuff. And that's what we have here, is God created the earth. There's nothing, no detail. It's just without form and void. I think some of the original in the Greek, it conveys that there's just chaos going on. It's chaotic. But then in verse 3, it says, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. So he's starting to take form here. He's starting to fill in the details, kind of like in that bronze sculpture. As he goes along, you start seeing claws and paws and head and face. God's starting to give his creation details here. A couple things I want to focus on, and we're going to go through this pretty quick. But the first thing, God creates it. He saw the light, and what did he say about it? In verse 4.
That it was good.
Yeah, he saw the light, and he said that it was good. All right? God created, and it was good. I create, and sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good. Not really good, but never create something good like God did. The difference from when I create things and when God creates things, when I create something, I don't create it out of nothing. I create it out of stuff that is already there. God's creating out of nothing. The other thing that we want to talk about here is at the end of it, it says, so the evening and the morning were the first day. That word day there in the Hebrew, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but my understanding is that's from the word yom in Hebrew. And that word can have two different meanings. It can be a day, as in 24 hours. It can also be like a long period of time, like we would say the days of Adam. We'll get to talk about Adam here in the next time, or a little bit tonight. Adam's life, he lived about 900 years. We'll talk about, there's some reasons why lives were longer back then, but he lived about 900 years according to the Bible. So the days of Adam would be a long period of time, right? It would be 900 years. That's not what this is talking about here. And the way we can tell that, we talked about last time how you can look at a word in other places and it will give meaning to the context here. You can look at the word yom throughout the Old Testament, and anytime that word is used with a number before it, it always is a 24-hour day. And so that would be one reason why we would take this as a literal 24-hour day. And the other reason is just the plain reading it. It says, so the evening and the morning were the first day. Evening, morning, sunset, sunrise, that's a day, right? Now, does this matter? It does matter, yes. Science has said that the earth came about over long periods of time, over billions of years. This is saying that the first day of creation was one day. So we'll see later, we're not going to get into it a whole lot tonight why it matters, but it's going to become important later on that the timing of this does matter. We'll get into it later. Then God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Thus God made the firmament, and he divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, so the evening and the morning were the second day. We've got this word firmament. What does that mean? My whole childhood, I had no idea what this word meant. What does it mean? Any ideas? This is a word we don't use today. That's what I thought. Your dirt comes and the next day, okay? That's what I was taught. I thought firmament was dirt. It's actually the sky. It can refer to, like you look up and you see the sky is blue. It can also refer to the heavens, like space. Okay, so we have a little bit more description here. And this is a different situation from what the world looks like here today. It says in verse 7, thus God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. So we have this earth that's covered with water. God has separated the water, so you have, there's no dry land at this point, it's just water covering it. So we have the water, the sky, and then it says that there's water over the firmament. So we have sky, water below, and water above. We don't have that anymore, do we? There is no, you look up and there's no layer of water over the top. There was a layer of water over the top, and that's going to be significant when we get to Genesis chapter 6 and the flood. But right now, that's just what's described as we have a ball covered with water, the earth is covered with water, and then above there's sky, and then above that there's another sphere of water. All right? Verse 9, then God said, and again, we're going to go through this really quick, and then we're going to talk about it more and kind of fill in some details and stuff. Then God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so, and God called the dry land earth. And the gathering together of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. All right, so now we have dry land is created. Then God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and the herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the third day. Okay, so we've got dry land, we've got plants are created. And we have this thing here that says that the herbs that yields seed and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself. What is that talking about? Anybody have any ideas? It means that it's going to reproduce itself, right? Do people make things that reproduce themselves? We don't have the capability to do that. But it does, and it says it's according to its kind. The Hebrew word there is baramin, and it's a specific type is going to produce that specific type again. So if you're going to farm, if wheat prices are high, you go and get wheat seed and you go plant that, and it's not going to grow alfalfa, is it? It's going to grow wheat. It's going to grow according to its kind. There's an order we see here in God's creation that we can see that there's this order that God has put into the earth and the creation. We'll talk more about that. This word's going to come up again in a couple more verses. So the evening and the morning were the third day. Again, evening and morning, third day. So in one day, God created the dry land. He creates the plants. Then God said, okay, this is important because what does science say about plants? Where did plants come from? How long did it take them to come according to your science class in 7th, 8th grade? Billions of years, right? Yeah. So this is in contradiction to what we're going to see in our science classes. Completely and 100% different. Then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven, and to give light on the earth. And it was so. Then God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the fourth day. So what has God made on the fourth day?
Stars, moon, sun.
Yeah. And what is in verse 14, what is the purpose? There's a couple purposes, but in verse 14, what does he tell us it's for?
For signs, for seasons, for days and years.
Yeah, I can go outside. You could put me in a coma for years, and I can go outside, and if I look up and see Orion overhead, I know it's winter, right? If I go outside and look to the south and see Sagittarius and Scorpius, the constellations, I know it's summer. And so we can tell the seasons by the stars. One of the ways that they used to tell the years is they would point an instrument up at a certain star at a certain time on a certain day, and you go back in a year at the same time, and it will be aligned on that same star. Like you take your telescope out and point the crosshairs on whatever star, you set it, you come back in 10 minutes, it won't be pointed at that star anymore, will it? Because we're rotating and the stars appear to move. You go back 1 year from that day and it will be pointed at exactly that star. We're familiar with sending probes to other planets. They shoot a rocket off to Jupiter's over here. They launch the rocket over here because they know in 6 years Jupiter's going to be over here, right? And it's so reliable that they can launch it. They know how fast the rocket's going. They know how fast Jupiter's going. And in 6 years, they intersect, don't they? It's like, I don't know if you guys have seen pictures, but I've seen pictures from the Civil War battlefield where they have two bullets that hit each other in midair and fuse. Have you guys ever seen that? Mm-hmm. That's what they're doing when they shoot a rocket to a star. They're shooting it way faster than a bullet, but you're shooting two bullets that are going to hit in 6 years because the movement of the planets is so reliable and so repeatable that they know exactly where it's going to be. And that's what God did. He set up this system where everything just carries on it with precision to the point that we can shoot a bullet at another bullet, and 6 years later they hit. Okay, and this is like almost crazy to me. It's like an aside. So he talks about the stuff, and it says, and he made the stars also. Like, oh yeah, by the way, God made the stars. Let's talk about that. How many stars are in our galaxy? And what galaxy are we in? Anybody know?
Milky Way.
The Milky Way galaxy. How many stars are in that galaxy?
Millions.
Wrong.
Septillion.
200 to 400 million. Not sure, but 200 to 400 million. So yes, millions, many millions. All right, that's a small galaxy. How many stars are in a big galaxy? You know what? The biggest galaxy has 20 trillion stars as an estimate. All right, how many galaxies can we see? We can see between 2 and 400 billion galaxies. And that's as far as our telescopes work. Beyond that, we don't know what's out there, but they estimate that there may be 20 trillion galaxies, some of them with trillions of stars. Now, to put this in perspective, these are numbers that we can't comprehend. Let's put it on something that we still can't comprehend, but that we can relate to. If you were to go out to Waikiki Beach and count the grains of sand, it would be a pretty big number. If you were to count the sand on all the beaches and maybe add in the Sahara Desert and every other grain of sand on the earth, what number do you think we would come up with? It's a number I've never heard of before, but the numbers or the estimates that they come up with, and there are different ways they do it, range from 1.5 quintillion, which is 1 followed by 18 zeros, up to 1 septillion, which is 1 with 26 zeros after it. That's a lot of sand. How many stars do you guys think are in our universe that they estimate? 7 septillion. So it's more stars in our universe than there are grains of sand on the whole face of the entire earth. And it says that, and God created the stars also. It's like just like an afternote, not a big deal. But God put all of those in the universe, up in the sky, just by speaking with his word. Last time we talked about that we use the word omnipotent. He's all powerful. This puts that into a new perspective, doesn't it? Now, what does evolution, or what does science say? How did the stars get there? We had this explosion that created matter. This matter pushed all these stars out to hundreds of millions of billions of light years away.
Sorry.
That's okay. So, anyways, we have these two contradicting ideas here. I can't even fathom the energy that it would take to push one star that far out, let alone septillions. Have you guys ever run out of gas and had to push your car down the road? How much energy does that take? Now imagine if there were a star pushing that star out billions of light years. How far is a light year? Light travels at 186,000 miles per second. So that's 1 light second. 1 light minute would be, multiply that by 60. That's how many miles light goes in a minute. Multiply that by 60 again and you get a light hour. Multiply that by 24 and you get a light day. Multiply that by 365 and you get a light year. I don't know how many miles that is, but that's a long ways. Now, they estimate that the edge of what they can see in our galaxy is like 1 billion light years away. How much energy does it take to push a star that far? It didn't happen. God put each of those stars there by hand, or not by hand, by his voice. And that's what it tells here. We see the power of God. Going on to verse, so the evening and the morning were the fourth day. Verse 20, then God said, let the waters abound with the abundance of living creatures and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens. So God created giant sea creatures, and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abound according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, and God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply in the earth. So the evening and the morning were the fifth day. So now we have sea creatures, that's going to be the fish, all the stuff that lives in the ocean, and birds are created on the fourth day. And what does it say? It says they reproduce, or they produce according to their kind. Is that word, what? I'm sorry, fifth day. Sorry, what did I say? Fifth day. Thanks, Heather. I would be lost without my wife, obviously. Moving on, then God said, Let the earth bring forth the living creatures according to its kind, cattle and creeping things, the beast of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So he made all the animals according to their kind. How many of you guys have a German Shepherd? Anyone have a German Shepherd in here?
Oh, maybe.
Okay, I know you do. Anybody have a little dog? We're not little dog people. My grandpa had a Pomeranian when I was a kid. It was a little fuzzy, useless animal, but it was a dog, right? It's the same kind as that German Shepherd. They can interbreed. They can produce offspring because they're the same kind. Do you know that camels and llamas are the same kind? They can interbreed. All right, tigers and lions can interbreed. They could technically, physically it may be difficult, but they could technically reproduce with your house cat. They're the same kind. And so we have these kinds. They can reproduce within their kind, but have you ever seen anyone breed a dog and a cat? You can't do it because they're different kinds. They don't cross. So that's important, and we'll talk about that if we have time a little bit later. Then God said, Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. So it says that God created man in his own image. What does that mean? We said last week that God is a spirit. He doesn't have a physical body. So that doesn't mean that if we were to look in the mirror or if we were to stand face to face with God, that we don't look like him. There's not going to be a physical resemblance. So if that's not the case, what would that entail, being made in the image of God? Okay, we've talked about God is all-knowing. He's very intelligent. He has an intellect. We're not on the same magnitude as that, but we do have an intellect, don't we? We're able to reason things out as God can reason. God doesn't. I don't think he has to reason because he knows things, but we can reason things. We can be reasonable. God's emotional. As we go through the Bible, it's going to talk about God is loving. I think that's probably one of the most well-known characteristics of God is that God is love. God also, we'll see where he becomes angry. Things happen, evil happens, and God is angry over that. The Bible talks about God being jealous. We see jealousy and anger typically as bad things. In the case of God, God does not do. God is righteous. I think we talked about that. He's not going to do things that are bad. It's not wrong to be jealous. If there's a guy who is trying to pick up on my wife, it is okay for me to be jealous of her in that case. That I'm going to go and say, hey, this is my wife. She's mine. She's not yours. That's good for me to do that, isn't it? The same thing with God, to be jealous over his people's affections. God doesn't want people to be worshiping. We've said that there's only one God. We talked about that last week. God is jealous for our affections. He doesn't want us to worship false gods or to serve other gods. And we see in the Old Testament that his people were constantly serving other gods, and God was angry over that. He was jealous for their affections. He wanted them to come back and worship him. So those are kind of there's a lot of other things, but that's what it means to be made in the image of God, that we have characteristics that are similar to God. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, See, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food. Also to every beast of the earth and every bird of the air and to everything that creeps on the earth in which there is life, I have given every green herb for food. And it was so. So apparently everything was vegetarian back in this time. Nothing ate meat. So we can see that back in that time, it was different than now because vegetables tasted good. Everybody liked to eat vegetables, right? Why do you think it is that everything was vegetarian? It doesn't say this explicitly here, but we're going to get into it in the next chapter and in chapter 3 also.
There was no death.
There was no death. Nothing died at this point. And so in order for something to eat meat, something would have to die. Nothing's dying right now. Everything is living basically forever, unless something happens to mess it up. And I don't want to spoil the future lesson, but something happens to mess it up. All right, but we'll talk about that later. But at this point, nothing dies, and so everything eats vegetation. Where did I want to go with it? I think there's another thing I want to touch on. Okay, so like I said before, this is all vastly different from what they teach in school, isn't it? Does it matter which one we believe? Does it make a difference? And the answer, I mean, I think you guys know the answer, but I'm going to tell you the answer. The answer is yes. And we don't have to it's not, when you were in 7th grade, you guys remember 7th grade science, 8th grade science? For something to be scientific, there have to be two things that are there. Do you remember what that is? It has to be observable, so you have to be able to watch it happen, and it has to be repeatable. You guys remember that? This is like digging way back in time. Nobody remember? Okay, I remember that. I don't know why it stuck out. Is creation of the universe observable? Can we watch it happen? No, we can't. Is it repeatable? Not that I know of. It's only happened one time that I'm aware of. So it's not observable and it's not repeatable. By the very definition, this type of what they call science, what the teachers call science, is not science. It's faith, right? It's religious belief. We can't observe it. We didn't see what happened. We can look and say, I think this is what happened, but we don't know because we weren't there. We can't repeat it to see this is indeed what happened. So when scientists tell you this is science, it's not, all right? They're looking at what happened and they're interpreting how they think it happened, but they didn't see it happen, and they can't do experiments to confirm whether it happened because it will never happen again that I know of. It's not science, all right? So let's get that established right now. It's faith. It's a religious belief, just like this is a religious belief. This is not scientific either because we can't see it, we can't repeat it, but we have on good authority on the Word of God that it happened that way. Now, there's a lot of evidence that will support the Bible's claims. When we get to Genesis 6, we're going to talk about the flood. And I think you guys have probably heard about Noah's Ark. You throw that into the equation, now all these things that we see in the fossil record, they all make perfect sense according to this model that God created and there was a flood. So we'll talk about that later. I just want to just kind of mention a couple things here just to let you know that the scientific explanation for this doesn't make sense, that there's major problems with it, okay? You guys familiar with President Trump complaining about the delays for Air Force One? He's upset because it's years behind schedule. He wants to have the new Air Force One plane so he can fly around it. Have you guys heard that in the news? Okay, well, it's a thing, and he's been talking about it lately. Boeing obviously is embarrassed because they said it would be done by this date, and it's going to be like 2028 or something now is the date. And so Boeing, they had an idea. They had some scientists who were really big on not the biblical view, but the Big Bang Theory. And they decided they're going to put this theory to work. They took their fuselages that they had for this airplane and all the parts that they'd had rivets and sheet metal, plastic for the seats, fabric, they had computers, and they took it all down to Missouri a week and a half ago. And they put it out in the field. They bought a 1,000-acre field, and they put this in the field because they heard that there was a big storm with tornadoes coming through, all right? And all this tornadoes and wind and energy, just like the Big Bang, is going to take all this stuff and it's going to put it together, right? That makes sense, doesn't it? Does that make sense? No, it doesn't make sense, but that's what we're saying happened, right? That there's this big explosion, and it put everything together. You have a 3-year-old, all right? I had 4 3-year-olds. What would happen if you took your son and put him in the bedroom with all his toys in their containers and their shelves where they go, and you shut the door for 3 hours?
Oh, it takes maybe 5 minutes.
Right.
Or less.
Right.
It takes everything out. Just
You
looking
put
for that one
random
place.
energy, and what happens is chaos.
Yeah.
Now, John was in the army, and I know that like all good soldiers, when he got out, he took a couple hand grenades home with him, right? And he gives you one of his hand grenades. You go in there and you pull the pin, you toss it in that room, and you pull the door closed. It goes off, and would you expect everything to be put back in its place? You're throwing random energy into the room with the expectation that there's going to come order out of it. Do we really believe that happens? Does that make sense to us? It completely doesn't make any sense. It's against all logic, isn't it? Okay, I've got this watch here. I found this. It was out in the ground. There was a lightning strike, and the heat from the electricity took all the minerals in the ground, and it made this watch. Right? Did you guys get your watch that way? Where did this watch come from? Why do you say that? I mean, why do you say that it had to come from somewhere and not from random energy? Because it doesn't happen, does it? There had to be a watchmaker. Something complicated has to have a watchmaker, right? And yet we look at this universe that is far more complex than my watch, far more complex than any machine in the whole universe. We have cells that we still can't understand how they work. The human body fixes itself. If I cut my arm, a week from now, it'll be healed over. The human body reproduces. I've got kids. Heather and I reproduced. You guys reproduce. You have a kid. Everyone in here has done that. It happens. There's nothing that is man-made that can do that. We can look and see what happens, but we barely understand the body. We look in the cell, and even from when I was in college, you take a cell biology class, and there's all this new information that they've learned, and they still can't even scratch the surface of what is going on in there. And yet they say that it just happened that these molecules started coming together. While we're here, let's go a little bit different route. Any guys in here like biology? What is the simplest, you know what the simplest organism is? It's a bacteria. And the simplest one is actually man-made. They made it in a lab. They took a bacteria, they took the nucleus out of the cells in it, and they hooked up DNA, and they put their own DNA in there. So they made basically a range of DNA, and they put it back in there, and they'd take out different genes out of it, and they got it down to 473 genes. And genes are basically, they code for protons and control how the cells work. But they took every gene out that wasn't necessary, and they came down with 473. If they took out any more than that, it wouldn't reproduce and it would die. But with 473, it could reproduce and it could live, and it was functioning. Can't get any simpler than that. DNA is made up of nucleotides. There's 4. It's like an alphabet. There's 4 of them. There's adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. You remember this stuff, Jesse, from college? Okay, kind of. You're the doctor, of course you do. So we've got these 4 nucleotides. It's the alphabet of DNA. Adenine pairs with thymine, guanine pairs with cytosine. So on one side of the DNA, there's 2 strands. So you write, one side has all this alphabet, and then another strand is going to pair. They'll start pairing up the corresponding. So adenine will pair with guanine, and it'll be the opposite on the other strand. But the one strand, it's like reading a book, and it has all this stuff. So there are 500,000 nucleotides in this one piece of DNA. The idea that these all came together at the same time in the right order to speak a language, to tell this cell what to do, just by adding and just lining up, it's impossible. Let's put it a little bit simpler so we can understand it. You guys ever flip coins to see how many times you can get heads in a row? Okay, what are the chances if you flip one coin of getting heads? 50%, 1 and 2. One time will be just probability, one time will be heads, one time will be tails. What does it take to get heads 2 times in a row? 1 in 4, right? What about to get 3 times in a row? 1 in 16. It's a square function. If you were to do this out to get heads 100 times in a row, what's the probability? It's 1 followed by, I think it's almost 100 zeros. It's impossible. Now, we've got these nucleotides. We have 4, not 2. So to get 500,000, what is the probability of that? If you type it into Google, it's 1 followed by 300,000 zeros. It's impossible, all right? You have to have every single one come together at the same time in the same order to spell out what this cell does and how to reproduce, how to make energy and all the things that a cell does. You have to have all of them. It can't be any simpler than that. Is that going to ever happen? 1 followed by 300,000 zeros? It's impossible. And yet scientists tell us that that's how this came to be. All right? Now, I've told you all this so you'll understand that it's not possible. Now, let's talk about why it matters. All right? Let's turn to Psalm 19. And it's on your sheet. So Psalm, and Letty, you got the same Bible as I do, so it's going to be on page, once I find it, it's going to be page 520, 519. It's a great thing. John ordered this Bible. He showed it to me. It's the same one I got, so it works out good. Okay, so at least I hope it is. If I'm wrong, you're going to go to... okay, so page 519, and it's Psalm 19. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. All right? It says you look up at the sky, And it's a demonstration of God's power and his glory. You look at the stars and it says, there is a God, and he's great and he's powerful. Okay? If evolution is true, this verse is a lie, right? If evolution is true, this is not true. The Bible just lied right here. It lied in the first page, and it lied right here. Turn over to Isaiah 45:18. It's going to be on page 695.
I was almost perfect.
For thus says the Lord who created the heavens, who is God, who formed the earth and made it, who has established it, who did not create it in vain, who formed it to be inhabited. Okay? I am the Lord and there is no other. This is what God says. It says it, thus says the Lord who created the heavens, he formed the earth, he made it, he established it, he did not create it in vain. And then what does it say? It says he formed it to be inhabited. God made the earth for us. He made it as a place for us to dwell. If Genesis 1 is a lie, this is also a lie. It's not true. Turn over to Colossians 1. Colossians 1 is on page 1132. If you know where you're going, Letty, I don't mean to tell you.
Oh, no,
that.
no.
She doesn't.
Okay.
No.
That's the,
I'm watching to see how far
okay.
you're going.
Yeah. I'll tell you the page number. It's great. John made a good choice. We'll turn to verse 16. This is talking about Jesus. It says, for by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. Okay? It says Jesus created everything. Not only that, it was created for him. He created it to bring glory to himself, basically. Now, this verse right here, this is, I think, maybe not the neatest, but this is one of the neatest verses in the Bible because it explains a mystery that science can't figure out. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. Another translation says, in him all things are held together. You guys ever play with magnets? You take two, the same pole, and you push them together, what happens? Fly apart, right? Every element has a proton. It has a positive charge. It's a little ball in the middle that has a positive charge. Hydrogen has one proton. That's not a problem. Helium has two protons. That's a problem. Why is that a problem? You have these two positive charged particles right next to each other. What do they want to do? They want to fly apart. You get sodium, potassium, carbon, nitrogen. You go down the line in the periodic table and you keep on adding a proton. The more you get, the bigger this problem is because you're putting more of these positive charges right next to each other and they want to fly apart. Science looks at this and they can't figure out how it doesn't fly apart. And they have this force that they call the strong force. Nobody knows what it is. Nobody can explain it. They just say there has to be this force to hold every single atom together other than hydrogen because it only has one proton. But the rest of them have got these protons pushed right up next to each other that should fly apart. What keeps them together? It's the hand of Jesus holds every single atom together. That's what this says. Now, if Genesis chapter 1 is wrong and science is right, what does that mean? It means that this verse is a lie. You take Genesis 1 away, and the whole Bible is like pulling a thread in a sweater. The whole thing comes apart. If we want to try and fit in with what science tells us is true, we can't accept this. The two don't go together. We have to either say the Bible is true in the start, or the whole thing falls apart. Does that make sense? Now, we've talked last week, and unfortunately you weren't here, but we talked about all these evidences that the Bible is true. John probably can fill you in, and I can fill you in later, but we have all this evidence that shows that the Bible is true. There are no contradictions in it. Nobody can say, oh, the Bible's wrong right here. All right? Why is it that churches have fallen in a lot of churches, they'll buy into evolution? Why? How did that happen? Where did evolution come from? How did this theory come about? How long has it been a theory? You guys have any ideas? You guys even know when it started? It's a new theory. It was in the 1800s when it really started. A guy named Charles Lyell came up with this idea that he called uniformitarianism. And what that says is that things happen the same today as they happened every single day in the past. And it just keeps on going on the same. And he applies that to geology. And he said, you look at the fossil record and you can see that there's these fossils in there that this had to be the first thing that was created because after it, you see something that's more complex and more complex and more complex. So therefore, started out with some sort of simple thing, and it turned into something else. He was friends with a guy named Charles Darwin. Ever heard of him? Okay, this was back in the mid-1800s, and they started these kind of new ideas. Lyell had to do with geology and the earth and how it came to be. Darwin had this idea called natural selection. You guys heard of natural selection? Had to do with finches on an island in the Galapagos. And what he said there's some birds that have thick beaks, some birds have small beaks. When there's a lot of water or whatever and the seeds get thick, then it turns out that the birds end up having thick beaks. Is that one bird turning into another bird? He observed this, and I think this is scientific, that we have what we call natural selection. All right? What happens is the birds with the thick, stronger beaks are able to crack the seeds, and the ones with the weak beaks can't crack the seeds, and they die. All right? That's not a bird turning into another bird. That's what's already in the genetic code being expressed. Back in the 1800s, in England, they started the Industrial Revolution. And I'm going too long, I apologize. We'll wrap up here in a second. I'm told that when they started the Industrial Revolution, they were burning coal, and all the soot got on the trees around the factories, and they had these moths that were white. And the trees had been white, and it was hard to see these white moths, but the trees get a brown coat of soot on them, and now all of a sudden, the moths all turned black. Occasionally, you would see a black moth, but most of them were white. What would happen is the white moths would land on the dark trees, and they would stand out, and the birds would eat them. So then you have a few that are black, they're dark, they blend in with the dark from the soot stains on the trees. Now the white ones get eaten, and you have just the brown moths. All right, is that moth turning into a cow? No, it's taking the genetic material that was already there, and it's being selected. All right, there is no evidence in science that one kind has ever turned into another kind. There is evidence of what we would call, when I was in college, they called it speciation, that you have certain traits that will be selected over another one due to environmental factors. But it's still a moth, right? There's never anything that has ever been shown to turn into something else. The fossil record, they'll talk about the fossil record. The fossil record is so screwed up when you really start looking at it. You've got things that are supposed to be really late in the evolutionary period. They're way down at the bottom that they find, way below other things that are supposed to be simple. You have, there's a picture I saw that they're uncovering this dig site, and they have a fossilized dinosaur footprint. Okay, that happens. There's footprints you guys ever seen pictures of dinosaur footprints that are fossilized? Right in the middle of that dinosaur footprint, guess what they see? There's a human footprint. All right, so they tell us that they're separated by hundreds of millions of years. The fossil record shows that there were humans and dinosaurs at the same time. They were alive together. When we start looking at the flood, it's gonna completely make all of that fit together. They talk about the missing links in the chain of monkeys to people. It's not missing links, it's a whole missing chains. And the supposed transition forms they talk about all these, you guys remember Lucy and all the different hominids in biology? You guys ever read about those? They have a couple bones on most of these. It's not a full skeleton. They're taking maybe a skull or a jawbone, and they're saying, oh yeah, this is a transition between monkeys. They don't even have full skeletons. They're making it up. Why would people make this stuff up? Why would they come up with these theories that just don't fit with what we see? Any ideas why that would happen? Let's turn to Romans, and it tells us in Romans, and I don't want to get way ahead of where we're at, but I think it's important that we get this stuff sorted out now, because down the road, we need to have an understanding of why we can trust the Bible, and I think understand maybe some of the motivation of why people have turned aside from the Bible. Romans 1, chapter 1, verse 16, and for those of you with my Bible, it's on page 1081. Okay, Romans 1, verse 18. For the wrath of, we're just going to start in verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Okay, so what this is saying is that people are taking what they recognize, what is true, and they're pushing it down. They're getting rid of it, they're burying it down deep so they don't have to deal with it. It says God is angry over this. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. It's saying there's evidence of God that we can all see. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. It says that everybody has evidence that there is a God. You look at the stars at night, you look at the sky. I don't think there's anything, when I'm driving to work in the morning and the sun's coming up and I look at that, just that beautiful colors in the clouds, that to me is a picture of God's handiwork, that he created that. He made that sunset or sunrise. It's beautiful. You look up at the stars at night, 7 septillion stars, or however many there are up there, that God put that there. As far as I know, it's just for our enjoyment, for us to see his power, and for us to let me rephrase it, not just our enjoyment. He put it there for our enjoyment, but also to glorify himself, so that we can understand the magnificence of God. And it says here that people suppress that truth and unrighteousness. They don't want to acknowledge that there's God. Why would that be? Because if we acknowledge that there's a God that is this powerful, it means that we are accountable to him, doesn't it? It means that we are bound to, we are at an obligation required to obey him. And people don't want that they don't want that on them. And so they bury the idea of God and they get away and try and get away with it. Charles Darwin was asked about religion, and he said, and this is a paraphrase. He said, I grew up a Christian, and I don't like the idea that my dad and my brother who rejected God may be punished eternally for that, so I reject it. All right, this is a guy who started this other idea of where life came from. I don't know that he intended, that was his whole thing, was what life came from. But this is the father of evolution, is Darwin. I don't want to deal with the Bible, because if I follow it to its conclusion, my father and brother who rejected God are being eternally punished. That's why people have chosen this other belief as to the origins of the world. Is there credibility to that when we really break down the ideas that they're teaching us? One, the simplest cell, it's impossible that every single one of those nucleotides came together in the right order at the same time for that cell to have 500,000 of the right nucleotides in the right order for it to be functional. You take any of those away and it doesn't work, all right? We can't throw a hand grenade into the kid's room and expect it to be clean. Why would we expect random energy to create the whole cosmos? It doesn't make sense. The Bible says it doesn't, and that's why it's important. All right, I apologize. I went too long.